The true cost of overconsumption is not salient on the minds of most consumers because we are products of a society that has told us it's okay to place our desires first and then told us that our desires should be that of material acquisition. They want us to want things so bad that we don't care who we have to step on to get them. Clothing, cars, cell phones. The creation of these things on a large scale is always fueled by exploitation because you need access to lots of natural resources and labor, and both of these are very abundant, and powerful entities are able to come in and abuse this abundance with little regulation. Hey y'all, it's Sarah Maria. Welcome back to my channel where we break down the problem of consumerism and its intersection with other systems of oppression, taking a deep dive into how we can be more conscious consumers and people in general. In today's video, we are asking the question of how did we get to a society that is so hyper-fixated on individual success that what's best for the collective is not even on our minds? And why is so much of the success we seek just the acquisition of material wealth and possessions? How can I get rich? How can I have my dream home? How can I have anything I want? We have cultivated a society that prioritizes the pursuit of individual material wealth over community-oriented values and even over collective responsibility for taking care of each other and of the natural world. This is shown in what some scholars call the narcissism epidemic, referring to the observable increase in narcissistic behaviors and beliefs in individualist cultures in the West. If you don't know, narcissism is a self-centered personality style characterized as having an excessive preoccupation with oneself and one's own needs, often at the expense of others. This individualism is shown in celebrity culture. The shift from prominent cultural icons being activists and leaders of social change to musicians and internet personalities who rarely or never speak out against global or local oppression and injustice, but are quick to sell you something or promote themselves in order to further their own wealth and influence. This individualism is also shown in manifestation culture, which spends a lot of time talking about how to get everything you want from this world, but very little about how to give your best to the world. We don't talk about how to be the best version of ourselves for the sake of others, for the sake of providing for society in a meaningful way. No. We talk about how to be the best version of ourselves so that we can get everything we want, so that we can bolster our own self-image, appearing wealthy and beautiful and accomplished in the eyes of others. We may not admit that or say it quite like that, but think about it. Why else do our vision boards have a Benz on it? Pictures and aspirations of luxury travel, a stack of money, or very specific amounts of money.
These are my pictures that I had printed. We'll start with this one. This is obviously a giant diamond necklace. Obviously, I want this to continue every year. Duh! Let's live our best lives.
Disclaimer, I do believe vision boards are a great tool, and I know many people use them to visualize non-material goals as well. However, we can't deny the fact that manifestation culture and manifestation gurus are a lot of times very materialistic. We have gone so far as to convince ourselves that these material things somehow bring us joy. We have forgotten the very real truth that joy can only ever come from within. The joy you experience from satisfying your own materialism is nothing more than a temporary rush of dopamine to your brain and an inflation of your ego. Bell Hooks quotes Richard Foster in the book All About Love, saying, "Greed has a way of severing the cords of compassion." Hooks then writes, "The worship of money leads to a hardening of the heart, and it can lead any of us to condone, either actively or passively, the dehumanization of ourselves and others." In this video, we'll be exploring the rise of individualism and how it was and still is cultivated to support capitalism and the pursuit of profit at the expense of well-being. We'll be exploring specifically the connection between individualism and material overconsumption, why people believe that they have a right to their overconsumption as if it doesn't affect anyone else, how people somehow forgot that things do not come out of thin air. Things are produced from people being overworked, sometimes to death, and from natural resources being extracted and abused. So no, your overconsumption and overindulgence is not not a personal choice that only affects you. Actually, nothing you do only affects you, but you have been sold the idea that it does. Let's get into it. So the Age of Enlightenment from 1685 to 1815 was an intellectual and philosophical movement in Europe that promoted ideas of reason, skepticism, and individualism. In Possessive Individualism, A Crisis of Capitalism, Daniel Bromley explains, the Enlightenment's main idea was the creation of an individual as a sapient, discerning, and choosing agent. Empowering individual sapience, discernment, and reason would, it was thought, eliminate parasitic monarchs and religious warfare. Of course, human society has made very significant progress in increasing quality of life through things like technological and medical innovations. However, Bromley points out that while this progress has been made in much of the world, this happy condition has not been uniformly experienced in all places. Anyone with eyes and a conscience can see that global societies are far from equal. Some nations and some people enjoy wealth and lavish lifestyles of comfort and hedonistic indulgence, while the others scrape by on whatever is left after the brutal exploitation of their land and people. Even within a developed nation like the US, why do we still see some people that are able to own a house with 25 different rooms that don't even get used, while someone else lives unhoused down the street? With individuals now liberated to pursue their own self-interest, it seems that they have developed an overarching affinity for doing precisely that, very often showing precious little regard for the interests of others. After this idea of individualism began to develop, it started showing up in everything from art to politics to economics. Economic individualism is centered on the idea of less government involvement and intervention in the economy and businesses. People who support this prioritize the principles of economic freedom, private ownership, competition, self-interest, and self-reliance. This is largely the basis of laissez-faire capitalism, which emerged in the 18th century during the Industrial Revolution. It is an economic philosophy of free market capitalism that opposes government intervention. It emphasizes that the government's role is to protect the rights of the individual, not to regulate business. It believes that businesses should be able to operate freely according to market forces like supply and demand. Now, to understand the rise of these philosophies centered around individualism, you have to understand the context in which they arose. In 17th and 18th century Europe, the dominant political system was absolute monarchy, in which a single person, a king or a queen, essentially controlled all or most aspects of life, including the economy. Their control also spanned vast empires, huge swaths of land, and all the people on them. This system contributed to great inequality, and the rights and access to opportunity for the majority of the population was very limited. So the Age of Enlightenment and the rise of individualist philosophies were revolutionary at their time and showed up as a way for individuals to harness their power and seek equality and self-determination. However, in modern society today, we've seen it evolve into an extreme form, which many refer to as hyper-individualism. This means the tendency for people to prioritize their own wants and needs without regard for others or for society. Communal values and hobbies are almost non-existent, and civic engagement like voting, volunteering, and political activism are not very popular things to do. While the rise of individualism has led to greater personal freedom and rights, creativity and freedom of self-expression, economic and technological innovation, in its extreme form of hyper-individualism, it's led to social isolation, the loss of the feeling of collective responsibility, and consumerism. Consumerism is an economic and social system that encourages the consumption of goods and services as a means of attaining well-being. Consumerism is a direct result of a society deeply entrenched in the values of capitalism. Capitalism meaning the economic system in which private individuals and businesses own the means of production and garner privatized wealth because of that. Because we live under capitalism, we engage in what's called a market economy, which just means that economic decisions like the prices of goods and services are guided by us, the consumers, and the businesses. In simple terms, this is called supply and demand. To quote Bromley again, recall that market economies are celebrated precisely because they are said to give individuals exactly what they desire in the way of goods and services, constrained only by their income. Notice that there are no obligations in a market economy. There are only tempting choices. Individuals can have exactly what they want, with the only condition that they must pay for it. But this is not an obligation or a duty towards others. So by its very design, a market economy under capitalism is built on individualist philosophies. The idea that individual consumers get to have access to whatever they want. Obviously, that's not entirely true because there are certain industries that are reserved for people of a certain wealth status. But it's also built on the idea that individuals get to run their businesses with little governmental intervention and regulation. I put individuals in air quotes because we know that in today's economy, pretty much all large-scale production is not really an individual endeavor. It's done by big business. Mostly large, multinational, multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, which I've talked about in a few previous videos. If you haven't seen those and you don't know, a conglomerate is just a large corporation made of several different and sometimes unrelated businesses that get bought out to be owned by the conglomerate. Some examples are LVMH, which owns all of these brands, Meta, which owns all of these brands, and Amazon is also a conglomerate because they officially own means of production in a wide array of industries, even though they began as just an online bookstore. What we see in conglomeration is that it's no longer many different individuals owning and running businesses independently, although there are still small businesses. However, the majority of what we consume is from big business. Speaking anecdotally, the majority of people in my life get their clothing from large fast fashion or luxury fashion corporations. We buy our groceries from large chain grocers like Whole Foods, which joined the Amazon conglomerate in 2017, or Giant, Walmart, etc. Almost everyone I know shops regularly on Amazon for pretty much everything from clothes to furniture to household decorations to beauty products. Everyone shops at Target, Ulta, and Sephora for toiletries and makeup and so on and so forth. The point I'm trying to make here is that consumption within our market economy under capitalism is built on individualist philosophies, but it has really transformed into a very harmful and damaging hyper-individualism, both on the part of businesses and consumers. Big businesses, such as these corporations that all of us shop at for pretty much all of our basic necessities and unnecessary things too. These big businesses have taken individualism so far that they engage in business practices that further their own wealth and individual success while actively overlooking what's actually best for society. It's that fundamental loss of communal values and collective responsibility that is characteristic of hyper-individualism. Not just the loss of these values, but the willing sacrifice of them for the sake of making a profit, a big profit. For an example of this, check out my last video, which explores the rampant use of toxic chemicals in consumer products and the greed of chemical corporations that is the reason they use these toxic chemicals in the first place. They're faster, cheaper, and easier to produce in mass. So even though they're known to be harmful to our health, they still use them. In that video, I also explore the power that wealth brings these large corporations. I discuss the ACC PAC, which is the American Chemistry Council Political Action Committee, that pools funding to support political candidates that support the interests of the chemical industry, the interests of themselves. Because of their wealth, they're able to have a huge influence on governmental policy regarding the protection of their business interests. They have influence over how they will be regulated. So of course, this is what allows them to continue using toxic chemicals that are known to be toxic without facing any real consequences. So while economic individualism, like I said earlier in this video, is based on the idea of minimal government regulation in the economy, big business has abused this minimal regulation, and they have lost themselves to their own greed, lost themselves in their pursuit of individual success, lost themselves to hyper-individualism. Of course, they would not think they are lost because according to our very materialistic standards, they have actually won. For example, Jeff Bezos' net worth is over $200 billion. He flies around in his private jet, and apparently he just bought his 9th home last year on a luxury island called Miami's Billionaire Bunker. He's living in a materialistic paradise. Elon Musk's net worth is over $300 billion. He also flies around in his private jet and formerly owned 7 homes, of which he sold in 2021 for around $100 million. My point is, these billionaire business owners are prime examples of harmful hyper-individualism. And it's not just them. These are just two very notorious ones. But to understand this more, let's look into what TRT World calls the environmental impact of extreme wealth.
Did you know that 2 private jets belonging to the world's richest man, Elon Musk, produce 5,497 tons of carbon dioxide annually, which averages around 15 tons daily? This equates to the total emissions of an average person over 834 years, or 5,437 years for someone among the world's poorest 50%. 2 private jets belonging to Amazon founder Jeff Bezos fly almost 25 days a year on average, and release the same amount of carbon emissions that the average Amazon employee in the US would produce in 207 years. While Walmart's Walton family own 3 super yachts that emit the same amount of carbon in 1 year as do 1,714 of their employees combined. These facts come courtesy of a first-of-its-kind study by Oxfam that was released ahead of the UN's COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan's Baku. It shows that 50 of the world's billionaires release more carbon emissions in just 90 minutes from their private jets, yachts, investments, and lifestyles than an average person does in a lifetime.
This is one example of the many consequences of hyper-individualism. One person is smart. They work hard towards their goals. They develop a great, much-needed innovation and start a business and grow it to become a multi-billion-dollar corporation, the American dream. We can look at them and say they've got it all. The money, the access to opportunities, the luxuries. But what about those that get the brunt of the dirty air left behind by their private jet? Or the dirty water left behind by their super yacht? What about those populations that get exploited to mine the land for precious minerals that will be used to make the expensive tech goods that make these billionaires rich? One man's wealth is another man's suffering. I saw a great video from this creator who taught this lesson. You see this, and you see a pencil. But if you look closer, you see the graphite that was mined exploitatively in countries throughout the global south. Then you see the wood, which came from large-scale deforestation. You see the aluminum casing that was also produced from exploitative mining in nations throughout the global south. And you see the rubber eraser that was also produced from exploitation in nations throughout the global south. And ultimately, it required energy and water and labor to produce it so it can turn into a pencil as we know it. Of course, the pencil is a great innovation and it's very useful. But the point I'm trying to make is that the creation of anything, pencils, clothing, cars, cell phones. The creation of these things on a large scale is always fueled by exploitation because you need access to lots of natural resources and labor. And both of these are very abundant in the global south. And powerful entities are able to come in and abuse this abundance with little regulation. This abundance of resources was the main motivating factor of colonization. And today, even if formerly colonized nations are free, they are still facing the legacy of colonization and the exploitation of themselves and their land that comes from that. So billionaire business owners that build an empire based on the production and consumption of material goods are inherently complicit in this exploitation, oppression, and injustice. They're actually more than complicit. They actively condone it because it confers to them great wealth and power. They make a huge profit. They have largely surrendered, whether consciously or unconsciously, their ability to actually care for what's best for the collective. The truth is, no matter how smart or how talented one is, no matter how great the innovations they contributed to society were, none of that gives someone the green light to engage in business practices and consumption habits that are directly harmful to other human beings and to the natural environment. It's not just billionaires and wealthy business owners that engage in hyper-individualism. It's also the consumers, you and me, the average everyday people. This can be seen in a number of ways, as this Medium article outlines: littering and damaging shared public spaces, entitlement in restaurants and stores, social media use for self-glorification, not for community building or advocacy. And to add one to the list, overconsumption. Overconsumption is a result of consumerist values, the belief that material consumption can bring us fulfillment and well-being. The entire wellness and supplements industry is fueled by this. The beauty and skincare industry is fueled by this. People today are buying more clothes than ever before because of this. If you scroll on the wrong side of social media, you'll find people showing you their 20-step skincare routine and fast fashion clothing hauls left and right. If you listen to mainstream popular music, you'll hear them talk about their fancy cars and their big house and all of their luxury designer goods and purchases and real diamonds. You'll hear them proudly proclaim that getting money is the most important thing on their mind. The normalization and ultimately glorification of material overconsumption is a result of hyper-individualism. Communal ties of family, society, and civic responsibility become secondary. Fulfilling personal wants takes priority over the greater good. The true cost of overconsumption is not salient on the minds of most consumers because we are products of a society that has told us it's okay to place our desires first and then told us that our desires should be that of material acquisition. They want us to want things so bad that we don't care who we have to step on to get them. We don't care that in order to get our Amazon package delivered to our front door in 24 hours or less, that means that workers in a warehouse are being exploited and overworked, sometimes to death. And even if we do care, we are not properly informed of the exploitation of labor and resources that is carried out to produce these things and get them to us in record-breaking time. Corporations are obviously not including that in their advertisements. My point is that we are so focused on the wants of self that we are unable to see, in my opinion, what's really important, which is that we should be striving to exist in harmony with other human beings and with all of the natural world. We are not meant to exploit each other and exploit natural resources for the sake of pursuing material wealth. And we are not meant to condone this exploitation by buying things we don't need from oppressive industries. We are so distracted by the pursuit of individual success that we have no time or energy or even the desire to engage in the fight for collective liberation, to dedicate time to learning about the history of global oppression, to use our voices to advocate for issues that are important to us. Instead, we are locked in on how to get rich, locked in on how to get your dream job, locked in on how to be personally successful on whatever endeavor we're on. And the thing is, I don't fully blame us for being this way. I mostly blame the system of capitalist greed that has created this obsession with, this addiction to material things. And in doing so, facilitated the decline in community and meaningful connection, the decline in real love for others and for the world. We're gonna close this out by doing a little reading session from All About Love by Bell Hooks. Chapter 7, Greed. Although we live in close contact with neighbors, masses of people in our society feel alienated, cut off, alone. Isolation and loneliness are central causes of depression and despair. Yet they are the outcome of life in a culture where things matter more than people. Materialism creates a world of narcissism in which the focus of life is solely on acquisition and consumption. A culture of narcissism is not a place where love can flourish. Left alone in the me culture, we consume and consume with no thought of others. Greed and exploitation become the norm when an ethic of domination prevails. In a world without love, the passion to connect can be replaced by the passion to possess. While emotional needs are difficult and often are impossible to satisfy, material desires are easier to fulfill. Confronted with a seemingly unmanageable emotional universe, some people embraced a new Protestant work ethic, convinced that a successful life would be measured by how much money one made and the goods one could buy with this money. The good life was no longer to be found in community and connection. It was to be found in accumulation and the fulfillment of hedonistic, materialistic desire. We are all witnessing the ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor, between the haves and the have-nots. Those with class privilege live in neighborhoods where affluence and abundance are made explicit and are celebrated. The hidden cost of that affluence is not apparent, however. We need not witness the suffering of the many so that the few may live in a world of excessive luxury. And to close out, greed subsumes love and compassion. Living simply makes room for them. Living simply is the primary way everyone can resist greed every day. We can work to change public policy, electing leaders who are honest and progressive. To save our planet, we can stop thoughtless waste. We can celebrate and honor communalism and interdependency by sharing resources. When we value the delaying of gratification and take responsibility for our actions, we simplify our emotional universe. The choice to live simply necessarily enhances our capacity to love. It is the way we learn to practice compassion, daily affirming our connection to a world community. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was informative. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like, hit the subscribe button, and turn on your post notifications so you can be notified every time I upload. And I will see you guys in the next video. Ciao!